My stepfather, Gary Voss, the man who married my mother when I was 12 and spent the next 15 years mistaking his own volume for authority, was standing in a hotel ballroom parking lot in his best gray suit, holding a plaque he hadn't won yet, when he watched me open the back door of a government sedan and a 4-star general step out and look directly at me. "Captain," the general said, like it was the most ordinary sentence in the world, "are we still on for the briefing?" I felt Gary's whole body go still behind me. Not the kind of still that means someone is calm, the kind of still that means someone's entire understanding of a person just cracked down the middle in under 4 seconds. I didn't turn around right away. I let myself have that 1 second, just one, before I had to be captain again, instead of the girl who used to sit at his dinner table, getting told what she was and wasn't capable of. "Yes, sir," I said. 15 minutes, West Conference Room. The general nodded, adjusted his jacket, and walked toward the hotel entrance like nothing extraordinary had happened, because to him, nothing had. To him, I was just his aide, doing what I always did. It was only extraordinary to the man standing frozen 20 feet away, holding a plaque with his own name on it. A man who had spent 3 years introducing me to strangers as my stepdaughter, she's a driver, nothing fancy. To understand how it came to stand there in that parking lot, with him looking at me like he'd never seen me before, I have to take you back to the dinner 4 days earlier, the one where he said it in front of people who actually mattered to him. It was a barbecue at the Hendersons' place, a family whose contracting business Gary had been trying to land a subcontract with for 2 years. His boss's boss was there, technically, Bill Henderson himself, the man who signed the checks. Gary had been working the whole evening like he was running for office, laughing too loud at things that weren't funny, refilling drinks nobody asked him to refill. And then Bill Henderson turned to me, made polite conversation, asked what I did. Before I could answer, Gary jumped in. "Oh, she's just a driver," he said, waving his hand like he was swatting a fly. "Government job, not much to it, really, just sits behind a wheel all day." He laughed, a little too hard, like he needed Bill to laugh with him, and Bill did, obligingly, the way people laugh at things they don't actually find funny but don't want to make awkward. I stood there holding a paper plate of potato salad and said nothing, because that had always been the deal. Gary talked, I disappeared. That's the part people don't understand about growing up in a house like that. It's not one big cruelty, it's 1,000 small erasures, repeated until you stop expecting to be seen accurately at all. To understand the distance between what Gary believed and what was actually true, you'd have needed to see me 2 years earlier, in a briefing room at Fort Belvoir, standing in front of a joint intelligence panel, presenting a logistics assessment that 3 colonels signed off on, without a single revision. You'd have needed to see the letter of recommendation my battalion commander wrote when I applied for the aide-de-camp position under General Marcus Whitlock. General Whitlock, 4 stars, 31 years of service, a man known throughout the Pentagon for being famously difficult to impress and famously loyal to the handful of people who did. You'd have needed to see the moment he shook my hand at the end of that interview and said, "Captain Bishop, I don't hire drivers. I hire people I trust to be in the room when it matters." At home, none of that existed. At home, I was the one who joined the army because she couldn't figure out what else to do. At home, Gary told anyone who'd listen that my job was ferrying important men from place to place, like I was furniture with a steering wheel. My mother, Carol, never corrected him, not out of cruelty, I think, but out of exhaustion. The particular exhaustion of a woman who'd learned that disagreeing with Gary cost more than it was worth. She'd smile at me across the table sometimes, a small apologetic smile that never turned into words. The only person who ever really saw it was my half-brother, Dominic. Dom, 17 at the time, Gary's biological son, the kind of quiet kid who noticed everything and said almost nothing. He'd catch my eye when Gary launched into his just a driver routine, and something would flicker across his face, not quite anger, more like second-hand embarrassment, the look of someone watching an injustice he didn't yet have the standing to name. Once, walking me to my car after a Sunday dinner, he said, low enough that Gary couldn't hear, "You know that's not what you actually do, right? I looked up your unit online once. That's not a driving job." I told him it was fine. It wasn't fine. But I'd learned there was no version of correcting Gary that didn't turn into a 2-hour argument about who was being too sensitive, and I'd stopped being willing to spend myself on that argument. So I made a decision, quietly, the kind of decision you don't announce because announcing it would defeat the purpose. I decided I was done explaining myself to my stepfather. If the truth ever surfaced, it would surface because the truth simply walked into the room, not because I'd stood on a table demanding to be believed. I'd spent my whole career being underestimated by people who mattered far less than Gary thought he did, and every single time, the correction came from the work itself. I decided this would be no different. I would let the record speak whenever it decided to speak, and I would not spend one more ounce of energy trying to make my stepfather see something he'd already decided he didn't want to see. I didn't have to wait long, and I didn't have to engineer anything, either, which, looking back, was the strangest part. About 2 weeks after that barbecue, my mother mentioned, almost in passing, that Gary's company had finally landed a sponsorship slot at the town's annual Founders Gala, the kind of black tie fundraiser where local businesses paid a small fortune to have their names on a program next to whichever dignitary the organizing committee had managed to book that year. Gary had been chasing a table at that gala for 3 years, convinced that rubbing shoulders with the right people in that ballroom was the thing standing between him and the next tier of contracts. This year, he'd finally gotten one. I didn't ask who the keynote speaker was. I already knew, because 2 weeks before that, General Whitlock's staff had looped me in on his travel schedule for the month, and I'd seen my own hometown on the list, tucked between a defense conference in D.C. and a base visit in Georgia, a personal favor to an old friend on the gala's Veterans Committee, a 20-minute keynote squeezed into an otherwise brutal week. I remember staring at that line on the schedule for a long moment. I could have asked to be reassigned for that leg of the trip. Officers do it all the time, for far smaller reasons than an awkward family dinner. I didn't ask. I told myself it was because reassigning myself would have raised questions I didn't want to answer. If I'm honest with you, some smaller, quieter part of me also just wanted to see what would happen. So I did my job the way I always did it. Confirmed the route, confirmed the security detail, confirmed the timing down to the minute, the same unglamorous, exacting work I'd done 100 times before for 100 less personal events. I did not tell my mother I'd be there. I did not tell Dom. I certainly did not tell Gary. I just showed up to work, the way I always did, and let the evening unfold the way evenings unfold when nobody's forcing them, which is to say, exactly as it was always going to. The ballroom was already half full when our motorcade pulled up. String lights strung across a covered breezeway, a banner reading Founders Gala, honoring our community leaders, stretched above the entrance. I got out first, the way protocol requires, and rounded the car to open the general's door, scanning the entrance the way I always scanned entrances, out of habit, not expectation. And that's when I saw him. Gary, in his gray suit, plaque already in hand, because the business awards apparently got handed out during the cocktail hour, standing maybe 20 feet from the car, with Bill Henderson and 2 other men I didn't recognize, mid-sentence, mid-laugh, the same performance I'd watched him give 100 times. He saw me before he registered what he was seeing. I watched it happen in real time, the flicker of recognition, the automatic half-smile you give family in public, and then the confusion, because I was in uniform, and I was opening a car door, and the man stepping out of that car had 4 silver stars on his shoulder, that even a civilian recognizes as a very big deal. Gary's mouth actually opened slightly. Bill Henderson, standing beside him, straightened up the way people do around rank, and General Whitlock, entirely unaware he'd just detonated something, looked at me and asked if we were still on for the briefing. "Yes, sir," I said. 15 minutes, West Conference Room. He nodded and walked toward the entrance, and for one long moment, nobody in that little cluster of businessmen said a word. Bill Henderson recovered first. "Gary," he said slowly, "I thought you said your stepdaughter was a driver. I want to tell you I had a perfect line ready. I didn't. I just stood there in the cooling evening air, keys still in my hand, watching my stepfather try to construct a sentence out of a reality that no longer matched the one he'd been selling for 3 years. He started, and then stopped, because there was genuinely nowhere for that sentence to go. I could have let him off the hook, some part of me almost did. Instead, I said the only true thing available to me. "I'm his aide-de-camp," I said, "have been for 2 years. Then, because it was true, and because I was done pretending it wasn't relevant, I added, "I also run his personal security detail when he travels." I watched that land on Bill Henderson's face like a physical weight, the sudden recalculation of who exactly had been standing at his barbecue eating potato salad in silence. The MC's voice crackled over the ballroom speakers just then, calling the room to their seats for the keynote, and I had to go. Protocol doesn't pause for family reckonings, but not before I caught, for 1/2 second, Dom's face in the crowd near the entrance. 17 going on 18 now, having come with his mother, both of them frozen mid-conversation with an expression on Dom's face that wasn't shock at all. It was something closer to vindication. Inside, General Whitlock gave a keynote about service and quiet competence that I'd heard some version of a dozen times before, and normally I'd have been half listening while I worked the room with my eyes, watching exits, watching hands, doing the job nobody in that ballroom would ever notice me doing. But near the end, he did something he almost never did. He deviated from his notes. "I want to say something about the people who make the work possible," he said, "the ones nobody puts on a program. My aide has run logistics for me across 3 continents, briefed 3-star generals without blinking, and once got me out of a security situation in 11 minutes that should have taken 40. Captain Bishop, would you stand, please? I have stood at attention in front of far more intimidating rooms than a small-town gala. I have never felt more exposed than I did standing up in that ballroom, in that town, in front of the people who'd spent 3 years hearing I was just a driver." I found Gary's face in the crowd. He wasn't laughing now. He wasn't performing for anyone. He looked, for the first time in 15 years, like a man who had run out of things to say about me, which, for Gary, was its own kind of collapse. The applause that followed wasn't loud or theatrical. It was the quiet, sustained kind that happens when a room recalibrates its understanding of someone in real time, and every single person clapping was someone Gary had spent years trying to impress. That was, as it turned out, the last real conversation I had about it, because there wasn't much left to say. Gary didn't approach me that night. He didn't approach me for another 6 weeks, actually, and when he finally did, it was a text message, not a phone call, 4 short lines that started with, "Hey, been thinking," and ended with something that was almost, but not quite, an apology. The kind that explains itself more than it accounts for anything. I read it twice, standing in a briefing room in Stuttgart on an entirely different continent, entirely different life. I typed back 3 sentences. "Thanks for reaching out. I'm glad the truth finally caught up. Take care of yourself, Gary." I didn't wait for a response, and I didn't check for one either. There's a particular peace in realizing you've stopped needing someone's understanding in order to feel like yourself. Dom, on the other hand, called me 2 days after the gala, and we talked for almost an hour, the longest conversation we'd ever had, about anything. He told me he'd started looking into ROTC programs, that watching that ballroom stand for me had done something to how he thought about his own future, that he wanted advice about ASVAB scores and officer tracks and whether I thought he had what it took. I told him the truth, which is that I thought he'd had it the whole time. He just needed a room that could see it. Now, 3 years later, he's a 2nd lieutenant, and last month he sent me a photo from his own commissioning ceremony with the caption, "Guess we're both just drivers now," and I laughed out loud in an empty office at 11 at night. As for me, I made major 18 months after that gala, ahead of schedule, on a promotion board that cited, among other things, my composure under unexpected public scrutiny, which still makes me laugh when I think about what they were actually referring to. General Whitlock retired last spring, and at his farewell dinner, in front of 300 people who actually understood what the job required, he called me the best aide he'd had in 31 years of service. And I believed him completely, because by then I'd stopped needing anyone in a gray suit to confirm what I already knew about myself. I think about that parking lot sometimes. The exact second before Gary understood, the last moment he got to keep believing the smaller version of me was the true one. I don't feel triumphant about it anymore. Not really. Mostly I just feel like someone who finally stopped waiting for permission to be exactly who she already was. If there's a version of you sitting at a table somewhere, being quietly diminished by someone who mistakes their volume for the truth, do the work anyway. Let the record catch up on its own time. It always does. If this one hit home for you, drop a comment and let me know which line landed hardest, and subscribe, because there's a lot more where this came from.